first talk this morning, I'm going to talk about how do you keep standards good. I mean, Vermont has developed a reputation of having really good products. We've got to make sure we keep it that way. Because one of the problems you have is as things get bigger, call it the scale-up problem. It gets harder and harder and harder to make sure things are being done right. Now, it says welfare auditing. But what I want to emphasize is that the principles of auditing and what's called supply chain management that I'm going to talk to you about right now, they apply to anything. Pasture, taking care of the land, just all kinds of things. And the thing that I found, and I've been around for 35 years, and when I first started, I thought if I could just build the perfect corral system, everything would be magically perfect. No, that's not the case. Having the right corral system certainly made handling the cattle easier, but you got to have the management to go along with it. So if I had a choice, what would I rather have? Would I rather have the state-of-the-art system with maybe mediocre management, or would I rather have the superb management and just so-so equipment? I'll take the older, adequate facility with the superb management. Now, yes, I do design corrals. I've heard you've sold out of my Humane Livestock Handling book, and there's a display copy up there so people can look at it, and I'll take orders on it. It shows lots of nice corral designs, and I've got some really cheap ones in there, too. And you do need to have at least adequate. Forklift pallets tied together with baling wire, that's not adequate. Because I think you have to have at least something to put the cattle in order to treat them. Head gate, there's a few things like that that you're going to need. Now, in doing handling, the thing that used to really frustrate me is I go build something really nice somewhere, out on a ranch, feed yard, or maybe a slaughter plant. And I'd go there for startup, and everything would be perfect. And I'd come back a year later, and they busted stuff, and the handling of the cattle had a lot to be desired. One of the problems you got with things like cattle handling, you go to the seminar, you're all gung-ho, but you can slide back into like bad practices and not realize that you're sliding back. Because some of my clients kind of get hurty feelings like, oh, well, you're using a hot shot, electric pot on way too many animals. And the yelling and screaming has come back. We're going to be talking about behavior after lunch. And one of the things you got to do is not yell and scream at cattle. And people would slowly start doing that again. What I have found is there's maybe 10 or 20% of the people, we tell them once and they just keep doing it. And then you have 10% that maybe just shouldn't be here. And then you've got a big bunch where if you keep measuring what you're doing, you keep it good. Because you manage the stuff that you measure. So, keep standards high, you got to keep measuring it. Okay, we're talking about different pasture measurement systems. Well, you've got to keep measuring, actually doing it. Then you can tell, am I getting better or am I getting worse? Because we've got to prevent bad from becoming normal. How did we get into such a mess with some of the animal breeding? Hybrid pigs that are lame, dairy cows that are lame, dogs that can't breathe, monstrosities like a bulldog. How did dog breeders breed this freakazoid? Because if you go back to 1938, bulldog, you look it up in the news on Google Pictures. Type in bulldog's dilemma into Google Images, and you can find a bulldog that actually has a snout. It actually has legs. The thing can actually function. Well, people just kind of blindly followed the standard, and you got into a bad case of bad becoming normal. Okay, I have found that about 20% of stock persons stay good. Other people you need to keep measuring. You need to keep monitoring, because you slide back in. Because can you imagine what the highways would be like if the police just stopped enforcing the speed limits? They just stopped enforcing the traffic laws. It would slowly get worse, and then it would just get to where everybody would be running red lights, and it would be absolutely terrible. No, you have to have the police there. Now, if you're involved in writing standards, I don't know, for welfare, pasture management, I don't care what it is, don't use these vague words like proper, adequate, and sufficient. What does that mean? And the thing I constantly fight, and I'm on a lot of different standards committees. I've done work with Whole Foods, and I worked on that GAP program, and one of the big problems is it wasn't clear. What's a GAP 1? What's a GAP 2? What's a GAP 3? Now they have those matrices. Guess who was involved in those matrices? I said, you've got to have something to where they look at a piece of paper, and you can tell, what do I have to do to go from 2 to 3 for beef? And you got to have one for each species. Things have got to be clear. And there's been some interesting brain research It shows that the normal human mind tends to drop out the details. The autistic mind's all about details, putting all the details together. But the thing is, you got to pick out what's the right details, not get caught up in all the wrong BS details. But I can't believe it. People slide back into these dreadful words. And we've got a big problem with FSIS, with the USDA right now, inspectors, where at one plant they're so strict that the plant wiggles wrong and is shut down. Another plant where they're doing all kinds of horrible stuff, and then the inspectors aren't doing anything. That's going on right now in 2011, 2012, 2011, because the inspectors don't have clear standards. And so there's too much judgment. Here's an example of something that's clear. All the pigs have to have enough space to lie down without being on top of each other. Don't say something like, give them enough space. And I better say, at the same time. Because you got some joker out there that wants to game the system. And after 12 years of working on these auditing and supply chain management things, you get some joker out there that wants to just game the system. And then they want to sue an auditing company. It's just a mess. And the other problem I've run into on standards committees, I hate to say it, folks, well, you got to make sure that doesn't happen here. The worst producers get on committees to water down standards. You see, you've got to put standards where the good producers are, and then you give the rest time to work up. I mean, you've got to have things that are attainable. But too many times, I've seen this happen in dairy, in pigs, in chickens. You know, the worst producer gets on there and doesn't really want to have a transport standard, for example, that body score 1 emaciated sows are not fit for transport. Yeah, because his company specializes in the half-dead pig trade. And this actually happens. Now, this is a scoring system that I designed for the meatpacking plants. And you need to be doing this in your meatpacking plants. You got 5 things here I measure. These are what I call an outcome-based variable. I'm not telling them what type of stunning equipment to use, but if you don't get 95% of those cattle dead on the first shot, you fail the audit. That's a McDonald's standard. McDonald's and Wendy's, they were the first companies to implement this. And for quite a long time, we had a really awkward situation where the big plants were better than the little ones. Now, more and more of the little plants are going in and getting audited, and there's a lot of good little plants. But you want to make sure your little plants are good. And 5 years ago, I had a chance to work with some of the state of Vermont. And they were doing some really good progressive things. How many animals did you poke with the electric prodder? Well, I can count that. Now, in terms of vocalization, mooing in the stun box, you're only allowed 3 cattle out of 100 mooing in the stun box. More than 3 cattle out of 100 mooing in the stun box, you fail the McDonald's audit. You got to get a passing score on all of these. And the McDonald's just kicked the plant off the approved supplier list this year. Obviously can't say who it is. You've got to keep some confidentiality. But it's a plant that sort of skated around. You know, they'd pass one time, then they'd flunk, and it gets back to management. Now, the good news is that most of the plants can be fixed without spending a fortune. You know, we did a lot of non-slip flooring. You're only allowed 1 out of 100 falling anywhere in the facility. If you fall down anywhere in the facility, more than 1, it's a failed audit. We did a lot of non-slip flooring. I did a lot of things with lighting and solid sides. Most places did not have to buy expensive things in order to pass. So you might wonder, how do I make this work if I'm auditing a little plant? I can't score 100 cattle. Let's say I'm scoring 6 cattle. Well, then the way I do it is everything has to be rendered insensible. Okay, I'd be over the limit on vocalization if 1 vocalized. I'd be over the limit if 1 vocalized, if 1 fell. And and on prodding, 5% is an excellent score. It'd be over that. You're allowed up to 25% because I've seen too many tails busted off the stun box entrance because they wouldn't go in. So what we've done to score little plants, let's say I'm doing a 6-head audit. Got to get them all dead. You'd be allowed 1 mistake on stunning, vocalization, or fall. You'd be allowed 1 error. You couldn't get all 3 of those. I have to give you 1 error because the sample's too small. And then what the plant should do is keep a running average. You can keep a running average, and they can see where they're at. But on a single audit, I'm going to have to give them they can have 1 move, they can have 1 fall, or 1 misstun. They can't have all 3 of those. That's the only way I can do it on a real small sample. The thing is, this is simple, and you've got to pass the whole thing. I can train anybody. If a cow's body touches the floor, it fell. Then we had a joker that tried to tell me that ham on pigs was not part of the body. Excuse me? I'm sorry. Is part of the body. It's objective. And we're not going to get to the problem we've got with FSIS right now, where you've got just, in the last 6 months, we've been involved with 2 plants, one that was really fairly decent. They wiggled their nose wrong, they were shut down. And another plant's just absolutely horrible. Inspectors aren't doing anything. And it's got to be simple, like traffic rules. You've got to have stuff that's simple to audit. Now, one of the things that auditing does is it weeds out the really bad places. It does a less good job at telling who is super, super good. But the thing is, you've got to make sure that we keep out of the system, especially as you're getting bigger, the places that can just ruin your brand. It's something really awful. They go out and, you got a bunch of, half-dead skinny cows on their place or something like that. You can't have that. Now, the other thing that's good about numerical scoring is whether I audited a plant or you audited a plant, we're getting the same scores. The principle is you got to figure out what's the really important things to measure. Well, in a slaughterhouse, there's like 5 really important things to measure. And then we have 6 acts of abuse that are automatic failures. And it's not limited to just that list. I can't think of every perversion that somebody could do. Put cigarettes out on them or something like that. But things like throwing them, dragging them, dropping them, slamming doors on them, things like that, the acts of abuse. You got to figure out what's the really important stuff to measure. Because you can't be there all day doing an audit. Now, Europeans have come out with some welfare auditing programs, which are very good scientific research tools, but they're too complicated for commercial use and too time-consuming. See, the problem is there's a difference. Well, now the mic just fell off here. Let me get it back on. There's a difference between something that you use for research and something that you got to use for commercial. And a commercial thing has to be simple. So you got to figure out what's the important things to measure. Also, this works similar to food safety systems. Hazard analysis, critical control points. What's the important things to measure? Well, in food safety, I think some micro counts on meat would be an important thing to measure. How cold is the cooler? Are they using the sterilizers? One thing that's really important in slaughter is hygienic skinning. Okay, you got a dirty hand that peels it back, and a clean hand for the, you're not taking the dirty hand, touching the meat with it. The other thing is, it's not a paperwork audit. I constantly fight people wanting to turn everything into a paperwork audit. And I've been into places where everything's perfect in paper, and you go out on the farm and it's horrible. Doesn't matter. Let's say we're doing something for environment or for pasture condition. Doesn't matter what it is. We need to be looking at the real things. Now, in 1996, when I first started this, I was hired by the USDA to do a survey. And only 30% of the plants could shoot 95% on the first shot. You know why? They didn't maintain the equipment. They simply did not maintain the equipment. You go in there, there'd be 4 broken stunners. It didn't have anything to do with design. They simply didn't take care of the stuff that they have. Now, I design stuff. Yep, I've got a whole book on humane livestock handling. It's all full of diagrams of corrals. And if you're going to be building something new, let's build something new that's going to work, something nice, not something bad. We'll be talking more about those kind of things after lunch, cattle behavior. But very quickly, when McDonald's started, it went over to 90% of the plants passing. There's about 75 plants on the McDonald's approved supplier list. Well, a couple of them got booted off in the first year. Boy, the industry got serious real quick. Simple things like maintenance, non-slip flooring. I added solid sides so the cattle didn't see people walking by. I'd add a light on a chute entrance. It was simple things. And I could fix most of them. And then we had a few places where they were so overloaded, the equipment was so overloaded that it was just a mess. And you can have a problem with that in a little plant. See, meat plants kind of come in 3 sizes. You got really little, uses one type of equipment, medium to large, uses another type of equipment, and mega plants uses another type of equipment. And if you try to push a plant between one of these equipment categories, you have a real mess. It will not work. Okay, let's look at some of the simple things. This is a behavior thing. We got an animal coming up here, and he's stopping. Well, look what he can see. Welding rig, golf cart. So I simply added some solid sides there. And you got to make sure that you use materials that don't flap. But they got to see a place to go. See the little gate there? That's see-through. And you can actually see where somebody had taken a torch and had cut out the middle of the gate. So it would be a see-through gate. You know, cattle are very much controlled by what they see. And in this situation, putting the solid sides up really made a difference because there was so much commotion all around. Now, if I was out in the middle of a pasture somewhere and nobody's around, then maybe I won't need the solid sides. But here I did, because you had people walking by there just constantly all the time. This shows a Jarvis pneumatic stunner that's used in the large plants. Also, it shows a piece of cardboard. I'm amazed at how I could fix slaughter plants with cardboard, portable lights, duct tape. I saw an ad up there for all kinds of different kinds of duct tape just the other day. There's an example of a light that I put on the entrance of a restrainer system, you know, experimenting with lighting. I move a light, get rid of a reflection on the floor just by moving a light. We had one plant, they failed like a whole pile of audits, and all that was wrong was reflection on the floor of the chute. I moved 2 ceiling lights about 3 feet, and the problem went away. Just moved 3 ceiling lights. So this brings up another thing. I want you using behavior rather than force, you know, to control animals. There's an example of the reflection there that made all these animals balk. And we moved the lights, and the reflection magically went away. Now, in designing a good auditing system for anything, there's 3 parts of a good auditing system. Okay, the rancher or the plant manager, they got to do their internal audits. Then, in most of your verification schemes, there's a third-party auditor that comes around. Maybe there's an organic standards person that comes around. Okay, that'd be a regular audit that you get on a regular basis. But there's a third leg on the tripod. That would be the Whole Foods auditor that comes around to a few places. Or McDonald's themselves comes around to a few places. You got to have that because you got to make sure that the third-party auditor or the organic auditor isn't just, you know, making it up in their car or maybe not, you know, doing things right. And when you look at supply chain management, let's look at some of the big disasters in supply chain management. Let me tell you about Baxter, the blood thinner company. They make heparin. Couldn't believe it, that a big drug company would have such bad supply chain management. And about 60 or 70 people died from the heparin. And it turned out that it was a fake heparin. They died of an allergic reaction. Well, heparin comes from pig gut. And I always assumed that these big companies would buy their pig gut from federally inspected slaughter plants. They bought them from Chinese backyard farmers. I am not kidding. I am not kidding. This was so bad. And then they went to a little garbage plant. And when the FDA finally went over to China to check it out, the plant had been bulldozed. So they only had the concrete slab to inspect. Okay, really bad. Another one was the peanut recall, where they had all the salmonella in the peanuts, and pigeons were doo-dooing on the peanuts. Well, they had a third-party auditor going around checking stuff, but the little snack cracker companies didn't do their check. Skippy and Peter Pan didn't get burned because that plant had already been delisted on the third leg of the audit and then thrown out. So the thing I want you really to think about, everything we do, is we got to make sure we're really doing the quality. Because 1 or 2 people doing something really bad, you really mess it up for a lot of people. And I've been spending a lot of my time with the buyers because that drives change. You know, the activists get out there and they get some really horrible videos up there. I call that the heat. Heat softens steel. And then I can bend the steel into pretty grill work. And I want to make sure I'm making pretty grill work out of it, not making a mess out of it. Because we've got to do things that are practical. So when I was working on implementing this, I bent over backwards to use every bit of design ability that I had to do something very cheap and economical to make the plant work. I only had 2 plants out of the 75 that did end up putting in an expensive thing that I designed, but I waited until like 5 other people had audited it, and it was just hopelessly flunking. And then I had to go in there and fix it. Okay, we learned a lot over the 10 years. First year, there was no difference between announced and unannounced. People didn't know what to expect. They do bad things in front of you. They just didn't know any better. We also found that there were some employees that we had to just get rid of. They like to hurt animals. We just shouldn't be there. 5th and 10th year, management started to learn how to put on fake shows. And then the 10th year, we caught falsified records. Now, what's been happening is video auditing. And I think this is something you need to be looking at with your slaughter plants, is you put in a video camera and auditors over the internet check in. And that prevents the problem of acting good when they see the lady with a clipboard. Prevents that little problem. And the Cargill company and the JBS company are doing that right now. Yeah, and guess what? They caught falsified records at one of their plants, fake internal audits at some of their plants, and some employees they had to get rid of. That's just sort of the harsh reality. And I went and had a chance to look at all 23 of the plants down at the mission control for all the auditing. And there was a plant, so I was just furious. There was a plant. They had a new young manager. I thought, oh boy, I'm really going to influence something. So I showed them how to handle the small groups of cattle and really handle the cattle nice and not jam the crowd pen full. I looked at it on the video, and there's 30 cattle stuffed in the crowd pen and 2 electric prods in the crowd pen. Shouldn't be any electric prods in the crowd pen. What's my feeling about electric prods? One and only one place you ever should have one on a farm, that's the entrance of the squeeze chute. Occasionally, you get a cow, just won't go in. And I don't want you to see you breaking her tail off. The one thing I'm adamant about is you never, ever carry an electric prod around in your hand. And on a farm, I can't imagine any place, only place you possibly need one is to get a cow into the squeeze chute. Because there are a few cattle that have had really bad experiences, like had a zillion students palpate them. I'll tell you right now, those cows don't go in the squeeze chute. Video auditing, it makes a big difference. And one of the things we found when the cameras are first put in and the employees didn't know they were there, the electric prod use doubled. Stunning, no difference, way, way, way dependent on equipment. And for video auditing to be effective, it's got to be monitored by people outside the plant. Because I've had other places that have put video auditing and the novelty wears off and they just don't do it. Well, gets yelling and whistling and all that screaming and stuff stopped. Now, there's different kinds of variables. And the kind of variables we're going on now, so no one should be telling you exactly how to do pasture. What you want to look at is certain outcomes, like how many skinny cows have you got? How many lame ones do you have? Those are outcomes. Okay, there'd be things you could do similar things in grazing. You know, bare ground, you certainly don't want to have that. And then you have some practices, you just say, okay, certain practices we're going to agree to just ban. But the old way of doing standards was to tell you exactly how to do stuff. There's a tendency now to get away from it. There's still a few input standards you need, like maybe, loading densities on trucks. There's a few things like that. Ammonia levels in buildings, maximums for that. There's a few things on that where I have to use an input standard. Well, here's an example of on-the-farm-based outcome measures for livestock out on the farm. Body condition score. That's something that people need to be doing. And there's good charts now available for that. There's some variation in the charts. Lameness. The website Zinpro, their company that makes minerals, Zinpro, Z-I-N-P-R-O. They got very nice videos for monitoring lameness. Dirty animals. Obviously, it's not going to count against a pig in the summertime if he's in a mud hole. Injuries, cancer eyes, swollen hocks on dairy cows. But in organic, we better be monitoring coat condition. I have been seeing some bad becoming normal. On ringworm on calves, no, it's not all right. Bald spots all over cattle due to lice. Oh, they go, well, that's normal in the spring for them to have that. Well, I'll tell you one thing you don't want to get back is warbles. How many people here know what grubs are that come out of the back? And how many of you have ever picked them out? Yeah, disgusting. Shove a Coke bottle over them and the little worm pops up in the Coke bottle. Really disgusting. And I was so happy when medicines came out on the market to get rid of warble grubs. Just awful. Ammonia levels, and if I found warble grubs, that's going to be a failed audit as far as I'm concerned. Now, what is going on here with this? Degraded something. Okay, and it seems to be working. It's all right. It seems to be working. I'm almost done with the slides. I don't know why that's doing that. When it's okay, and then another thing would be abnormal behavior. Now, if you're raising animals really extensively, you don't usually get abnormal behavior. Things like tongue rolling in dairy cows, bar biting on pigs, tail biting, things of this sort. Those are measurable. Oh, now I've got to click this because this doesn't want to work. Okay, now the reason why lameness is a good outcome measure is look at all the different things that can make a cow lame. You know, it's up to the veterinarians and the managers and everybody else to figure out how to fix a lameness. But many, many different things make cows lame. So I'm not going to audit you on your hoof care. Check you on lameness. You know, if they can't walk or if they've got, you know, visible things wrong with their legs, obvious things, not things where you have to be a veterinarian. Swollen hocks, feet are this long, you know, you got ram's horns for feet. Yeah, someone's going to fail an audit on that kind of stuff. They got to be able to walk, and they got to not have big swollen areas, injuries on them, things like that. And then there's other things to look at, death losses, on-farm losses, sickness. I put a little less emphasis on this because this requires records. And I've seen too many fake records, so I put the most emphasis on the things I can actually look at. Okay, then you have some practices that you just don't allow. You know, and that's easy to write those kind of standards. They're very good at writing those kind of standards in Europe, and standards about, you know, castration and stuff like that. Got some really good news on castrating cattle and dehorning cattle for pain relief. I just got back to the North American Veterinary Conference, and there's a scientist named Hans Coetzee, and he is at Iowa State University, and he's been working with a drug, meloxicam. It's a NSAID, a non-steroidal, you know, it's in the aspirin family of drugs. It's not an antibiotic or anything like that, and they're just putting that down the calf, and it gives them about 2 days worth of pain relief, and he's even found that in feed yards it's been helping on reducing sickness. You know, lidocaine works, but the problem with lidocaine is you got to give it to them, and then you got to wait for it to work. Now, in a dairy, you could make that work. But in a beef operation, that's just pretty hard. And I'm really excited about this meloxicam because that's something that's not going to be expensive, and it's also easy to do. Chuck a pill down them right while you're doing everything else. And then we have a few input standards we're going to need, like space requirements, feed and water requirements, ammonia levels, a few things like that. On ammonia, anything that's inside a building, any kind of a building. I don't care if it's an old barn or it's a mechanically ventilated building. If you're over 25 parts per million, that's over the safety limits for people. The animals should be at 10 parts per million or less. But as far as in most standards right now, this is one kind of place we're trying to make standards the same no matter what segment it's in. If you're over 25 parts per million, you need to be failing an audit. There's little devices you can buy to measure it. Now, you can also use numerical scoring to see if you made a change, did it actually improve? I put a light on a restrainer entrance. Vocalization score went from 8% to 0 because he didn't have to prod him as much. I reduced pressure applied by a neck restrainer. I went from 23% mooing down to 0. Those are simple changes. Now, let's just look at some things. And I want to get you like kind of primed for the behavior talk. An animal is a sensory-based thinker. If you want to understand behavior, you need to get away from verbal language. It's a visual thinker. It thinks in sound bites. It thinks in smells, touch sensations. It's all this detailed sensory information. So cattle perceive a man on a horse, a person on a four-wheeler, and a person walking as 3 totally different things. So it's really important to get them used to all 3 of these things. And when you introduce that four-wheeler, let's make it nice. It comes out there with feed. It's not chasing them all around. Man on a horse, man on the ground, that's different things in the mind of the cattle. So you need to train them to both. And that's my website, Grandin.com. I've got a lot of information on Grandin.com. And I want to just finish up, talk about a few other things, and then hopefully have some time for some questions. And I foresee in the future that a lot of the kinds of markets you're going into might get up to 20-25% of the total market. But there's some disturbing things out there. There's a segment of the public that has no contact with animals at all. I had to do a book signing at a Costco where you got to sit there in the Costco like for all day, and they don't even know you're there. So I started just becoming a Costco sales associate, and I walked up to every family and every older couple. I said, I'm a professor of animal science. I have a book about animal behavior. Do you have pets? And I was shocked to find out that 20% of the families in South Denver didn't even have a parakeet or a gerbil. In other words, they were living totally away from the outdoor world. But I think there's a hunger to get back to the land because it makes me really happy to see young people here. And I'm seeing more young people in your sector of the industry than I'm seeing in large-scale commercial sector of the industry. Well, I like seeing young people here. I think that's just great. And there's been some interesting survey results on what a lot of consumers think are important. And it was very interesting to find out that local scored as more important than organic did. And just one last thing to finish up on. It was interesting working with the big corporations on animal welfare. And it was interesting to watch this issue go from being an abstraction that you delegate to the lawyers, you delegate to PR, going to something real. And I took executives out on their first trips to farms and slaughter plants. And when things went well, they go, oh, that's not so bad. And when things went bad, they were appalled. And I remember the day when the half-dead dairy cow walked up the ramp into their product. They were horrified. And all of a sudden, it became real. And in 1999, I was hired to do little training things. And little training things morphed into a gigantic industry-changing event. It was a wild ride. And that's because those executive eyes got opened to what was really going on. But then on the other hand, that doesn't mean that, that everything that we're doing is wrong. But stuff that was really bad, clean it up, get it changed.